this isn't really a presentation. It's just more of sharing with the board and the community how we'll go through this process. You can go to the next slide, Greg. So looking at the threats, there were approximately, not approximately, there were 68 threats. Some of them are no longer relevant because some of the threats that came from the group talked about implementing in 21 rather than in 22. So we've narrowed down the threats a little bit. But basically, you see Princeton plan in the middle is our goal for September of 22. And around that are different issues and different focus areas that really need to be addressed. The PTA, for example, we have heard very loudly about concerns around the PTA reorganizing, what that will look like, how they will share resources, what their structure will be. Tomorrow, our PTA leaders will meet with a representative from New York State PTA to begin that process. So I'll be a part of that conversation for a little bit, but the regional rep for the New York State PTA will meet with our co-presidents and talk about different models, talk about the process, talk about how they account for their funds, how they create accounts in advance of the new PTAs being formed under the Princeton plan, so on and so forth. Facilities, certainly we have a decision with regards to what schools will house which grade levels. We have been having this conversation for a number of months, but tomorrow the team will formally discuss some of the pros and cons of the 3 different elementary schools housing different grade levels. And you see some other issues around transitions and professional development. Finances were some themes that certainly came out of the SWOT analysis. I'll give you an example of what the planning process will be. So we'll talk about personnel. Greg, if you want to go ahead. So when we look at personnel, we know that in the top left, we have some action items. We need to assign staff to a school. Then we need to identify which principal will lead that school, and then also support staff. So in the priority order in the top right, we want to make sure that by June 1st, everyone understands where they are going for September of 22. That's really important because as we go back to normal, whatever normal will look like next year, folks will also understand where they are for September of 22. And that's really important so we can use next year, including even the summer, for planning purposes. So by June 1st, our goal is to assign the teaching staff. In fact, that's almost done. We met this morning to move staff based on the HHEA contract provisions. We'll identify the support staff as well, TAs, aides, and monitors. And then lastly, assign a principal to each of the schools. So how we go about this is looking at the bottom left. These are just an example of pieces of feedback that came from the SWOT analysis. So an opportunity is to make sure that teachers are aligned with student strength. And certainly that's a priority for us. Teachers that want to teach in a certain grade level be assigned to that school if it's of strength to them. One of the threats, obviously, that we've talked about and is certainly clear and present is cutting staff may impact programs in other buildings. This is where you get into, we have K-12 staff, right? Reading teachers, phys ed teachers. Some of these folks, while they have been historically assigned to elementary grades, they are certified K-12. So depending on what the staffing pattern looks like, there may be some folks who have just taught middle school or just taught high school, you name it, may be assigned to the elementary school on paper, and then we'll have a conversation about what the final staffing looks like. And you see another example about losing some staff. As the board knows, and certainly for the community's awareness, we spend very significant resources on recruiting and retaining our newest staff in terms of mentoring and professional development opportunities, their digital portfolio that they keep throughout their probationary period. So anytime you reduce staff and have to go through a reduction in force, it is not our rules, it's New York State rules, that goes by seniority. And oftentimes the least senior staff in an organization are some of your newest. So Certainly one of the threats is potentially losing people that we've invested quite a bit of resources in. And then lastly, the next slide is really an internal planning document. And this is just a brief example of a meeting we had today, for example, with Margaret, Lisa, Laura, and myself. So we talked about two big initiatives, two big decisions that need to be made. Our self-imposed deadline by June 1st, and certainly will be done sooner than that. But identify the staff to new schools. So a number of steps need to and activities need to take place. Review the sections, how many sections will be needed in the 3 new schools. We meet every Thursday with HHEA leaders to discuss this and other issues, but we'll review the collective bargaining agreement to make sure we're following the process, whether it's by grade, by seniority. And then we will tentatively place staff. We will have a master schedule, a digital master schedule. It will be in Google, but we'll be able to track and identify who will go to what school. So eventually, as we get closer to next September, but ideally, probably in the late fall next year, we zero in on what that staff is. So those staff members can start to meet after school or perhaps through some release time to build camaraderie, identify, the very basic things like mission, vision, and goals for the school, and start to really build a cohesive team in preparation for the September 22 launch. You see very standard who's responsible, some of the timeline. One of the main resources we need to use to do this is the teacher contract that spells out in very explicit terms how teachers are moved or transferred, or if you have a reduction in force. And these are meetings that we have every week, as I mentioned. Margaret began this conversation with the grade level leaders a week or two ago and started a FAQ with them. So this is just a window into some of the dynamics of how we get there. So as I mentioned, a lot of different initiatives are happening simultaneously, and they need to. But we'll have some shared planning documents. We also are putting together a Gantt chart, basically all of the decisions that need to be made, people responsible for making them, when those decisions will be made and to whom they'll be communicated. But really what our focus is for the next 6 or 8 weeks are really the mechanics. Get the staffing identified, get the leadership identified, because it's going to be that group that will go through action planning in other areas like transition planning, or certainly Lisa's going to lead the group on SEL and all special ed activities. Margaret will lead the group on staff development and allocating instructional resources. Laura will lead a group on instructional technology. So by June 1st, we'll know, everyone will know what staff will be where and who the principals are, and that will really kick off some of the other planning because we need to know who's going to be in which chair and in which school, and then we'll be able to continue our work. So I wanted to give folks just a brief update because as we had been discussing the potentiality of the Princeton plan, we had shared that we had been planning in the background just in case, and these are some of the plans and peek behind the curtain as to what the plans involve, who's involved, and what some of the resources and timelines are.
Thank you, Joe. Does anybody have questions? Oh, Corey.
I just have one quick question. Will transportation models factor into which grades go into which schools to minimize student ride time?
Probably not. And the reason is one of the benefits from having our own transportation models, we have a little more control over our staffing and use of our resources, meaning our buses. Our buses are small buses and our vans. So Liz feels confident that it wouldn't really matter what school has which grade level, because all of the bus rides, especially if you're coming from the Furnace Woods area where I live and you're going to Frank G or BV, they're I think 1.2 miles or 1.8 miles away. So it may not play that big of a factor. I'll tell you one thing that is playing a factor is, as we've heard throughout the commentary, transitions. And we have the opportunity, and it's really an opportunity that if you look at it that way, about the use of Furnace Woods as a 4-5 school. And Furnace Woods is separated from the middle school by 2 soccer fields. And we really could develop a culture and a sense of a campus over there from grades 4 through 8. So that, that would perhaps influence a transportation model, because she may be freed up a little bit, that if you live on the extreme west side of our district by the river where BV is, she'd be able to model your bus ride over to this part where I live, where you live, Corey, for 5 years in a row, and there'll be some more consistency there.
Would there be concerns then of having much older kids, like 8th graders and 4th graders mixed together on the same bus?
I'm not suggesting they'll be on the same bus. In fact, she's
Okay.
no. I'm just saying in terms of ride time.
Okay. And what about the potential for a later high school start? Is that being considered as all part of this?
Not part of this, because we want to be able to compare apples to apples. I know that that's been a priority discussion in the background of the board, and we wanted to chip away at some other priorities like Indian Point or the reorganization through the cost analysis.
Yeah.
What many districts have reported, if they do that flip, you're basically just taking your 3 elementary runs and running them early, and then your 2 secondary run, you're basically flip-flopping. It's still the same number of kids that have to go the same distance. You're just changing pickup and drop-off time.
Yeah, I'm concerned only because it would impact transportation modeling, right? If you're going to do the later high school, it would impact how you use the buses earlier.
Well, it
Earlier
wouldn't,
starts.
because our transportation model, we're pretty lean, and it's because we have a number of layers, and there's a logistics word for it, and I'm just going to call it layers. That the first layer, the first run is for high school. The second one is then for the middle school. Some buses go out to grab Furnace Woods, because Furnace Woods starts about a half hour earlier, and then the remaining buses grab the 2 other elementary schools. So as long as we keep those layers, we'll be okay, because then we'll meet, we'll ensure that we have enough capacity on the buses if everyone needs one, because we've got about 14 buses on the road at once.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Joe. Thanks for that update. I know everybody's anxious to get details and know when more details are coming, so thank you.